If you're anything like I know you are, and I might be, well, we're toy collectors. And it's a big part of our life, and it's a big part of our hobby. But the real question is, how long is this going to go on? I recently received a email from Lee Karaka, or Kakara. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing your name right, Lee. He asked me about the next generation, not Star Trek, but toy collectors. Well, are hobbyists, are collectors going to continue collecting into the future? Is this a hobby that has kind of limitless potential? And to understand that, we have to look at really why we collect, the joy we get from acquiring small plastic representations of pop culture. And it's not just, your average Joe. I mean, toy collecting has kind of gone mainstream with celebrities and TV shows and, movies, characters in fiction being toy collectors. Now, the thing with toy collecting is it's kind of all about chasing nostalgia, and we're usually about 30 years back, which means now in 2023, we're talking about nostalgia from the late 90s, early 2000s at this point. So the question is, will we continue to see adults, as children become adults, buying toy product for these nostalgic reasons? Is nostalgia strong enough to continue the hobby going? Now, a lot of people like to point to things like Hot Wheels, which has been out at market for 60 plus years and has a large adult collector following. But the thing that they don't tell you is the adult collector following for Hot Wheels is dying very slowly. It's not being replaced. So when you see headlines like this talking about how adults buying toys are the biggest source of growth for the industry, you really have to look at how this is just a weasel word. And weasel words are things that toy companies use a lot, especially when talking about toy lines ending or going away or having to deliver bad news. And the way they've kind of twisted the words here is they're saying that it represents the biggest source of growth. Well, sure, it may represent the biggest source of growth, but exactly how big is that? You have to realize that most toy product lines don't grow year on year. You also have to look at what's going on with the current generation as it gets older. It's very, very different from the generation we grew up with in the 70s and 80s. Kids today are bombarded by media, they are bombarded by electronics, and, well, let's face it, phones, TikTok, social media has basically become most children's plaything of choice, and that absolutely is going to affect the way toy collecting goes, because if kids are not getting into characters, why would they care about having toys of them? You also have to look back at the 80s and how toyetic and aspirational characters were in content in the 80s. If you go into the 90s, as you start to move forward, you do kind of see less and less of this. I mean, sure, you've still got, the Tick and Spider-Man thrown in there. And again, as you continue to move through the 90s into the 2000s and beyond, you'll see that content aimed at kids has kind of gone secular, where it's much more kind of like the 60s with Hanna-Barbera, where you're now just getting into comedy, as opposed to action-adventure aspirational heroes like, Mask and Ghostbusters and Transformers and He-Man and all of that from the 80s. You also have to look at how toyetic these characters are. Do they translate well from the content into an action figure, or are you basically just buying action figures of plumbers? So that's really the big question, is as we get farther and farther away from the original content, is there going to be enough of a nostalgia to, well, cause people to want to continue to buy product based on older content? And in my mind, the answer is probably not so much. I mean, the 80s was very, very special. It was kind of when video games were first coming on board, but we were in that pre-video game world. Fast forward to today, and you've got toy companies making product based on content that they haven't even seen yet, purely based on contractual obligations. This is no way to run a toy industry, making product for content that you don't even know if there's a fan base for it. So this is kind of what's contributing to the end of the golden age of toy collecting. The fact that characters aren't as toyetic, and we're getting more and more high-end priced items that are sort of finishing up our collections. Yes, nothing lasts forever, much like the original book that Die Hard was based on. But can toy collecting continue? Obviously, children are always going to need playthings. But the question of whether or not there's going to be an adult audience for these playthings, I think, gets answered very clearly by the 12-inch G.I. Joe line. So this is a line that has a very rabid fan base, but it's not big enough to sustain at market. And when these were pulled from market a few years ago, there was a lot of pushback from the fans saying, well, wait a minute, we're here, we'll buy these. And Hasbro said, no, you're not buying them. That's why we're pulling them. Or another good example is Indiana Jones, which only can be at market during a movie year. So these are very time-constrained product lines based on nostalgia, based on the age of the audience, and based on how toyetic the nostalgia and content was. And the farther we get from the 80s, the less toyetic and less aspirational the characters are. I was actually at a meeting recently and I made a Ghostbusters reference and nobody got it. And everyone else in the room was over 30. And it occurred to me that they were all like 1 year old when Ghostbusters came out. So I was like, oh, God, you're old enough to be working in an office, but you're not old enough to know a Ghostbuster reference. And if that's true, why would people want Ghostbuster toys in the future? So is it only a matter of time before adult toy collecting kind of goes the big A way? Probably. But hey, there's still a lot of toys between now and then. So we may be hitting a wall as far as price points, but at least we've gotten an amazing amount of characters over the last 30 years. And for that, I'm really glad. We've lived in a golden age of toy collecting. How long it's going to last is anyone's guess, but based on where things are going, I have a feeling that we may be in the tail end of it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and it was a look at some of the factors which may or may not contribute to adult toy collecting continuing in the far-flungish future. Share this video. It's the best way to support the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.